Okay, so a very warm welcome back, everyone, to this next session. It's a very interesting session. If you've ever thought about sailing off into the sunset, throwing off the corporate chains and just sort of leaving and exploring the world, it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce two interesting speakers today on this topic of the opportunities in new custom boat construction and how these economical long-range trawlers are changing the way to see the world. So a very warm welcome to Patrick Bray. He's a naval architect of Bray Yacht Design and Research from Canada. He's one of the world's leading experts in economical long-range explorer yacht design and build. And also to Will Lawton. He's a owner, a fintech entrepreneur, and he has owned one of these long-range economical yachts for the last 10 years. So a very warm welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Okay, good to have you here. Okay, so, you know, sort of a bit of an opening question. Lots of people sort of have these dreams of, as I said, finishing the corporate life, throwing off the lines, throwing off the shackles, and sailing around the world. Pat, have you noticed that there's more or less people these days sort of with this dream and idea? What's your exposure to that been?
Certainly. I mean, more and more people are looking at this option all the time. I mean, through technology, we have the ability to homeschool, to stay in touch with family virtually, and have an opportunity to see more of the world and understand it in a whole new light.
Okay, so
people have found ways to bring their work with them.
Yes, indeed. So you think that this trend is increasing, yeah?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And Will,
certainly since the global pandemic, people have been
Right.
talking about this a lot,
Yeah.
and boat sales are up tremendously over this last year, even the smaller boats especially, just so people can get and do things.
Exactly. And what about, Will, what about from your perspective? Have you seen an increase in this sail the world dream?
Yes, absolutely. You know, we've been living here in the marina in Singapore. You know, the activity level during COVID have just picked up dramatically. And while we can't sail very far, you know, certainly we can sail around the Singapore waters, and the marinas be packed and actively used. And not only that, I think a lot more people, you know, wanting to live on board boats and an experience living in marinas or living on the water. So yeah, I think it's a lifestyle choice that many more people are considering now than they would have 3 or 5 years ago.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's dive right into this topic of these opportunities in custom build boats. So Pat, you're a naval architect, so maybe you can just start and explain to us, you know, what is a naval architect? What do you do? How are you different from a builder and a surveyor and people like that?
Okay, well, naval architects are actually the designers of the project, and we use art and science and combine it all together to produce the end product, which meets all the client's expectations. And to do that, I mean, we don't look at not only the style of the boat, but we also have to look at the engineering, the structure. We have to make sure the boat floats where it's supposed to float, has the stability, has the sea keeping, you know, meets the speed and range requirements in an economical way and in a safe way.
Okay, so you're basically the person that draws up the plans, is that correct?
Yeah, the engineer and the architect.
Okay, that's great. And Will, would you like to explain a little bit about how you've been involved with this, with Mr. Patrick Bray and Naval Architects and your time of being a boat owner?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my experience was, you know, coastal cruising, smaller speedboats and fibreglass power boats around the region here. And really the dream was to build something that was a bit more stable, probably a bit slower displacement, more reliable, longer range, more comfortable to live on board. I never imagined I would spend 10 years living on board the boat, but you know, started the project with a friend here in Singapore. We took some time. We were both actively working and traveling at that point in time in our careers. But we eventually got the boats in the water in 2011. Actually, by pure coincidence and rental prices going up so dramatically in Singapore, as a short-term solution, we moved on to the boat in 2011, planning to look for a house or a flat to rent. And in fact, to this day, we've never looked to do that, and we've brought up 3 kids living on the boat here in Singapore. It's a very easy place to live on a boat from a climate perspective and weather perspective, but yeah, never really a plan. And of course, it's a passage maker, so it's very adaptable and it's worked as a home brilliantly, not just as a boat.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So, Pat, why do people build, do custom build boats? And why do they use a naval architect?
People do custom build boats because they're looking for something specific and they can't find it in the marketplace. Whether it's a certain number of cabins or accessibility for mobility issues, or they want to carry a submarine or a large boat on board, they're looking for features that just aren't available in the everyday production boats. Okay,
so it's sort of as simple as that. So if you're looking to buy a house, you either buy one from a firm that builds, what do you call those houses where they build a bunch of houses all at once, or you go to an architect and you build something that's bespoke for your needs. So it's just exactly the same as that, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
And so what are the key differences between custom and production? So, apart from getting your needs met and, getting, like you said, the cabins and what have you, what are some of the other key differences?
I mean, production boats are a generalized design that's based on demographics. They're created to appeal to the average requirements of the greatest number of people, but really don't meet the needs of anyone entirely. They're just sort of broad shot at the market, whereas a custom boat is designed specifically to meet the needs and requirements of one person or one family.
Okay. And what's the smallest size custom boat that you would build, and what size boats do you typically design and build?
Our work is generally sort of 75 to 150 feet, but we've done much smaller boats as well. Any boat can be a custom boat if it meets specific requirements. Okay.
And what sort of person will consider it? Is there a particular profile of person that would do a custom build? And well, you're obviously one of those people. So what's the profile of someone? Is it a first-time boater or an experienced boater? What's the profile?
Well, for me, I suppose I'd grown up with boats with my family, and my father particularly was a keen sailor and had motorboats as well. And then I sort of had smaller boats myself, and I think you're often talking, when you're sitting on the back having a beer and a barbecue, you're often talking about, well, the next boat is going to have this, that, and the other. And I think, as Patrick says, design, there are always issues with production boats in terms of your desires and needs from that boat. And actually, one of the simple things for us, we had a young family, and having a fast planing boat at that time was very uncomfortable in terms of the journey getting somewhere. And so one of the design features we wanted was a slower boat, was to enjoy the journey more than just getting to a destination. But we spent a lot of time talking about what would be the perfect boat for us. And a friend that I built the boat with had fairly similar ideas in terms of the interior layout and design of the boat. And so we drew that our requirements, and then went to Pat. Obviously we didn't have any skills in terms of the hull and some of the other capabilities, and needed a marine architect to make sure it was a seaworthy boat.
Okay.
And so Pat was able to convert our back of the cigarette ideas into something that worked.
Okay, fabulous. And so, Pat, let's just dive right in here to this sort of concept of the speed and the range and the expectations. Will's touched on, wanting to get something was a bit slower. So can you just sort of tell us a little bit about, some of these general things around, how fast can a custom build go? How far can it go? And just sort of some general sort of expectation setting stuff.
I mean, people always want to know about speed and range, and long range passage makers. People think of distance, but there's really a lot more to it than that. But let's cover the speed and distance part first. If you're talking about serious offshore like transatlantic, transpacific, or just really large bodies of water, it's very hard to do more than 10 knots open water because the water's not perfectly flat and it just isn't comfortable. 12 knots is kind of the maximum for most boats, regardless of how much money you have, how much horsepower you have, how much fuel you have. It takes a really, really big boat. I mean, I'm talking hundreds of feet to do more than 12 knots in open water because the comfort just isn't there. So that's a big part of it. And it's far more economical to do those lower speeds too. I mean, really, if you want to get someplace quickly, you need to take an airplane.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to sort of enjoy the trip, you take a boat. The other thing about long range motor yachts is people always want to talk about the range. We've had a client, he came to us years ago. He said, I want 10,000 mile range. And this was for a 57 footer. I said, gee, I don't know if I can do that. Let me study it for a bit and get back to you. And when I got back to him, I said, okay, well, 7,000 mile range is the maximum I can give you for the tankage for the boat. So that's what we did. He's never gone that far. But the other thing about a passage maker or a long range motor yacht, it's not necessarily just going a long distance. It's maybe going a much shorter distance, but having the autonomy to stay there for 2 weeks, self-sufficient, and then come back and know that, you've still got 15, 20% reserve on hand if the weather should be bad, if for a reason you should be late. It's not a big thing. It's not just about the distance, it's about the autonomy, the longevity of how long you can stay without having to go from marina to marina to pick something up.
Okay, that's interesting. So tell us, Pat, what are some of these innovations that have been going on, and what are some of the trends, and what is the innovation in this sort of the long range that you've been working on, maybe over the last five years or so?
We're best known for our work with fuel efficient hull technology. We probably do more work with bulbous bows on small craft than anybody in North America. A bulbous bow will save you 10 to 12% on your fuel consumption, or you'll get 10 to 12% more range for the same speed you used to do. There's also comfort factors. It reduces the pitching motion almost 30%, so the boat has a better feel to it. Okay. We've been doing other work on appendages to reduce that fuel saving even greater, but there's been all sorts of other technology. I mean, the most obvious one is LED lights. If you go to LED lights on a new build boat, you can reduce your generator size by 30%. And you're looking from going from a 90 kilowatt to a 60 kilowatt generator.
Okay.
It's a big difference in fuel consumption, a big difference in initial cost.
Yeah. And so this development, for example, in LED lights, is that a technology shift that these lights weren't there 10 years ago, or, what is it? Is it technology that's driving this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Part of it.
Okay.
People now are looking at diesel electric propulsion and all battery propulsion, which has all kinds of benefits in the marine industry. Diesel electric is very common on big cruise ships. A lot of bigger vessels for years have been doing that. The technology just wasn't available for boats under 200 feet, and it's still being developed for boats, that size range. There's some boats being done that way, and there's still, some teething problems, things to be invented, things to be learned.
Okay.
One of the things I'm really interested in is in the hybrid propulsion system is being able to operate on battery only. We see areas in the world now where people go in there with their boats and they're environmentally protected areas. You can't, dump any sewage over the side. But the other thing we're finding is, especially up here in Canada, people go into remote areas, they're parked, not far off the beach, and the bears come right down within 10 feet of them, and they go fishing, and the eagles are circling overhead, and the orca whales are playing in the bay. And if you get people every day coming in there and then firing up their big diesel and motoring out of there, those animals aren't going to stay around regardless of whether you pollute the water or not.
Yeah.
So by being able to silently come in there under electric power and sit there quietly without putting any pollution into the air and enjoy all that nature right there, you know, I think is huge benefits. And there's new regulations coming out on boats which are super clean, super quiet, super environmentally capable.
Interesting, yeah. And so are we talking about doing this hybrid propulsion and this technology on no matter if it's a 60-foot boat or a 150-foot boat, Patrick, it's still all doable, yeah?
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
great. Yeah. And Will, what's your sort of take on this sort of hybrid propulsion, you know, sort of the 10 years that you've had your boat? I'm sure that you've been thinking about all of this, if not involved in it already yourself.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the concept of building the boat started during SARS, actually, in Asia in 2003 to 2004. And our original concept was actually diesel electric with a Star engine and Siemens electric. I think we were probably a bit early for that, and bought a lot of the gear and equipment relating to it, particularly the Siemens side of the electric hybrid system, and it was probably too early. I was never quite able to commission that in a cost-efficient manner when we went into the water. So in fact, in about 2010, I suppose, I made the decision to go back to traditional single engine, single prop configuration. And that's what I have today with the Steyr engine, but it's a very efficient engine. And, you know, I'm burning at cruising speed, 12 liters an hour, something like that. So extremely efficient because I'm only doing sort of 7 knots, something in that region, 7-8 knots. So it is very efficient. But yes, absolutely. You know, the hybrid was very much part of our earlier concept. And I think if we're building the boat today, that's absolutely the way we would have gone.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
Especially with a displacement boat, you can have a lot of battery storage, which is heavy. So it lends itself absolutely to a very efficient format.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, so now a topic that I find quite interesting because people seem to be quite polarized. Building materials. I do want aluminium. I don't want aluminium. So, you know, we help people find boats, and, you know, various people have said, no aluminium for me. And then there's one guy, I only want an aluminium catamaran. So Pat, can you shine some light on this polarization that's going on with steel versus, or any material, but versus aluminium, and perhaps educate us a little bit on the pros and cons here?
I know people have definite views on it, don't they? And aluminum versus steel. Personally, I quite like aluminum, but, you know, they all have pros and cons. Certainly for custom boats, for one-off construction, metal is the way to go, whether it's steel or aluminum. Fiberglass is really designed as a production material, and you need a mold or a lot of handwork to get the finish right. Aluminum has much less corrosion problems than steel, although it's not initially known for that. Right after the Second World War, a lot of scrap aluminum was aircraft grade, and people would use that for building boats, and it didn't have the properties that the marine aluminum is that we have now. We have fishing fleets out here on the west coast of Canada. For the last 40 years, all the fish boats have been unpainted aluminum. It's a good product that way. Steel is easier to weld typically than aluminum, although there's so much aluminum work done that people are pretty familiar with aluminum too. The big advantage for steel has been the paint that's available now. It's a much better quality paint, and rusting isn't as big a problem as it used to be. Okay. But aluminum boats, you have the option of not painting them at all if you want, and you won't have any corrosion problems. So the paint becomes just dressing up the boat. Okay. And Will, what's your view on the aluminum versus steel?
Well, we obviously went for steel, and the boat was prepared extremely well, and we've never had any problems with rusting at all. You know, you're constantly dinging the boat or create it, you know, or scratching it or whatever it may be, and it's just a quick sanding, primer and paint, and so it's very easy and low cost to maintain, and you can very much keep on top of it. So steel's been the perfect solution for us, and I'm very glad I went that way. We've had absolutely no problems with it. I've painted the boat once since it was originally painted in about 2004, 2005. So the climate here in terms of the sun and UV can damage paint, and yet we've been able to maintain them without really any problem. And I think, although I'm certainly not an expert with the aluminium, obviously electrical current, etc., can be an issue. And in marinas like we're in Singapore, I know people are quite concerned about aluminium here because the amount of building and electrical activity very close to the marina. So they're quite nervous about that.
Okay. Another thing around aluminium is the weight, isn't it, Patrick? And then how much gear. So, you know, does the lightness of an aluminium boat make it perform better, or?
It does to some degree, and more fuel efficient, but for long range motor yachts, when you use aluminum, you don't really use it to make them super light. You usually go quite heavy on the aluminum.
Okay.
They're still, of course, much lighter than a steel boat, but it's more a function of maintenance, and partly it's the weight issue.
Okay.
And people think of aluminum as being very expensive. It is twice the cost of steel, but it's almost half the weight. And when you consider how much weight actually goes into the boat in the hull structure itself, the overall cost difference on the finished boat is, you know, between 1% and 2%. It's not a huge factor in the consideration, okay, but it's still the majority of people prefer to go with steel hulls.
Okay. No, that's interesting. So, as far as selecting a yard to build your custom boat, Pat, what are maybe 3 tips or 3 things to consider when someone's selecting a yard to get their boat built in?
I mean, there's a lot of good shipyards around the world, all capable of doing good quality work. I guess the first requirement is, do they build in the size range and the material that you're looking for? Second would be, do they build in a quality and a price range that you're looking for? I mean, do you want, you know, Rolls Royce? Do you want the best of the best of the best, gold plated and silk carpets? Or are you looking for a more utilitarian boat? Is it going to be just you and a bunch of the guys out sports fishing all the time, and you know, you got the dogs and the cats running around? And do they have a build slot in the time frame that you're considering? Okay. Because a lot of the good builders are very busy.
Okay. And building the boats in Asia, there's some good yards here in Asia as well, Patrick. Is it cheaper to get boats built here than in other parts of the world?
It is cheaper than certainly Europe, even cheaper than most of North America. Eastern Europe, Turkey does a lot of boat building. Their prices are quite reasonable. There's other places, Poland, even Egypt's doing some boat building. But Asia is a very good market for get a boat built. Is it?
Yeah. So how would I select a yard of all the choices that are available? How would I do that? Would you help me do that as a naval architect, or?
Yeah, that's definitely what we do. Because that's usually the first thing the client says, okay, you know, I want this boat, you can design it, where's it going to be built? And then we look at some of the main issues for us is, do you want the boat being built close to where we are because you want us to go see it all the time? And do you want it close to where you are because you want to see it all the time? Okay. You know, just price, of course, comes into it, and level of finish. Do you want a Dutch built boat, which is, you know, the highest quality and comes out with a brand name like Moonen or Heesen? That alone will add 30% to the cost. Okay. Fed ships are fabulous motor yachts, but they're almost double the price of everything else. But it's like, you could say the same about a Rolls Royce versus a Cadillac.
Okay. And Will, what were your considerations when you were choosing a shipyard?
Well, the partner that I was building the boat with had far more technical knowledge than me, and so he primarily, made some of those decisions. There was a consideration of doing it in another center in Asia, Vietnam or China, as opposed to Singapore, which is where we actually built it. Singapore obviously being more expensive than those centers, but I guess our concern at that time was the oversight of the project. So we ended up doing it in Singapore, and pricing was quite reasonable in terms of steel pricing and yard prices, because it was a bit of a recession in Asia at that point in time. So I think our timing was quite good. And of course, it meant we could, actively oversee the boat. And I think that's critical to have somebody overseeing the project who has the technical capability, rather than just handing that away. So you do need that oversight, and that's got to be one of the primary points in terms of deciding where to get the boat built. And you've got a relationship and trust with somebody that's overseeing every stage of it, because we certainly underestimated how difficult a project it would be and how long it would take. I think we thought we'd be in the water within 2 years, and it certainly exceeded all of that.
Okay, no, that's great. Okay, so just a couple of sort of closing questions now, and maybe just sort of some tips or some key things for people. So Pat, sort of what are, if you like, the 1 or 2 or 3 problems that you would solve, or you help people with when they come to you and say, help me build a boat? So what are some of the key things that you either sort of help these guys figure out, or you solve for them, or you advise them on these 3 things: do this and don't do that? What would some of those be?
Generally, the people that come to us are quite experienced boaters, so that makes it a lot easier to start with. Sometimes they have some misconceptions which we have to try and work around, but I think that if they have a good idea of how they're going to use the boat, what they're actually looking for, makes our job a lot easier. If you can tell me what you want, then I can produce that for you. We had a client come to us one time, said, I'm interested in getting a boat built. And I said, okay, well, a sailboat or a powerboat? And he said, well, I'm not really sure yet. And I thought, oh, this is going to be really interesting. But if you know what you want and you've got definite ideas of how you're going to use the boat, we can go through all the compromises that are required, because there's always a compromise. I think people have to realize that whether it's a brand new boat or whether it's a custom boat, they're not cheap to get a good quality boat. And that they take time. Boats are almost always take longer to build than you think they're going to take. And unfortunately, a lot of times they cost more than you think they're going to cost too. Having a really good design, like a really complete set of drawings from the start that the builder can quote on, makes a big difference. Having a project manager or somebody who's really knowledgeable about boats involved with it all the time is really important to keep the project on track, and to keep the owner informed, and to keep the wishes of the owner clear to the yard. Right. And we've had situations many times where the owner will come on board and say to them, I'm going to do sports fishing on this boat. The cockpit, the bulwark around the cockpit is a bit high. Can you make it lower? Can you just cut it down 4 inches? Of course the yard can. They build the boat. They're still building the boat. They can do all that. They do that, and then they give them the price for $10,000, $15,000, and they're like, whoa! If I known it was going to cost that much, I wouldn't have done it. Right. Well, the yard probably should have discussed that too, but somebody should have stepped in and brought all those points together.
Okay.
We had a client say the same thing. I want to add a 3rd generator in my boat, and the yard gave him a price which he said was totally outrageous. He said, I could go to a boat show, I could buy that generator, and probably not as cheap as the yard could buy it, and all I have to do is install it. Why does it cost so much? So I said, well, let me talk to the yard. So I went to the yard and I said, so give me your side of the story. And they said, okay, well, yeah, we can buy that generator pretty inexpensive. Now we need to put an engine bed in the boat, of course. It's going to need a fuel system. It's going to need a cooling system. It's going to need an exhaust system. And then once we've got that generator running, it's got to be all tied into the electrical panel, which probably is going to need be either increased or a separate section of it. So it's not just buying a generator and sticking it in the boat. There's so much more to the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, Will, what would be your 1, 2, or 3 tips for someone that's considering a custom build? What is it that you've learned that you wish you'd known before you started?
Well, I think we started with some key principles about the design and the build of the boat. One was keep it simple. And we followed that through. In fact, we probably didn't follow that through in the concept of the engines at the beginning, which failed, and we had to sort of reverse our decision on that. But we wanted a boat that was going to be fairly manageable in terms of upkeep on the exterior. So principles, we don't have any wood on the boat. There's very little stainless steel. It's largely painted surfaces. We don't have it fully faired. So the maintenance and upkeep of the exterior of the boat is extremely low and extremely simple. So it's about developing those key principles right at the beginning and keeping that. Of course, like all things, once you've lived and experienced in it, we may have done certain things slightly differently. I think the environment that you're using the boat in here, we're in very hot, humid environments. And, a lot of boats have a lot of outdoor space, but without any cover, etc. That people are buying European boats, say, in the Asian environment, and you probably need more cover. So I think, building a boat for the environment that you're largely going to be using it in, and creating some sort of flexibility with it, but ultimately it's about having some of those key principles and sticking to those principles through the building of the boat.
Okay, thank you. That sounds great. And Pat, final question. So if someone wants to hire a naval architect, what would be some things that they should ask in order to know who to select? How do you get the right naval architect on your team?
I guess the big thing is to look at different types of boat, decide what style of boat you want, and find an architect that's doing that style of work. And then make sure he's fully qualified, check with previous clients if you can, reviews of some of the boats that he's done. Just make sure that he's not just a stylist, because that's a very big thing these days. There's a lot of yacht designers who are good at drawing it, but they don't actually do any of the naval architecture part. That's a key portion of the whole project, of course. It's more than just a floating piece of art. It's a machine that takes you out on the water. It's got to have form and function as well. So combining those two is really important. A lot of times the shipyard just does the naval architecture part, which they will be competent enough certainly to do the naval architecture, but it won't necessarily, in my opinion, give you a boat which is ideally suited for your work as a pleasure craft, because they tend to do more commercial work. Okay. And it won't necessarily be as fuel efficient or as economical in a lot of ways. I think that's where naval architects specializing in the field of pleasure craft can add a lot of extra benefit.
Okay, fabulous. So, well, thank you both very much for your thoughts and your expertise. It certainly fueled my desire to want to get on that long range economical trawler and cruise the world. So Will, you're just next door to us in the marina, so I can tap on you for those three points I should do. And Pat, it's great. And, with the world being so small, it doesn't really matter where we are these days. So it's great to have you from Canada joining us here at the Expo in Asia, and really look forward to working with you and into the future, Pat. So thank you guys very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, bye for now, and we'll see you at the Expo.